Hello everyone, welcome back to the Beginner's Guide to Crypto. Today we have episode 4, which is about cryptocurrencies. Bitcoin currently has some flaws. Basically the transactions are too slow and can take up to about $25 to go through for their transaction fees. And this is a big problem if you want to, for example, buy a cup of coffee with Bitcoin, which currently is not really possible to do on-chain at least. There are some scaling solutions. We have something called Lightning Network. The way this really works is quite a bit out of the scope of this video, but pretty much it just puts a lot of transactions off-chain so they don't put more pressure on the Bitcoin network, and the Bitcoin network can just do the bigger transactions. And then we have something called the Lightning Network, which actually takes care of the small amounts, and then this later gets settled on the Bitcoin blockchain as well. Like I said, it's a bit too difficult to explain in this video, but this is a way for making sure that you can still do smaller transactions. However, these are quite a bit less decentralized and also a bit less secure. But I mean, if you're buying a cup of coffee, it doesn't really matter that much. So yeah, all of these scaling solutions pretty much involve some decrease in security or decentralization. But as I said, it's fine for small transactions. If you buy a cup of coffee of $2 or whatever, then it doesn't really matter too much. And right now, the Bitcoin blockchain itself is much more of a store of value, and it can pretty much just succeed just doing that. Gold's market cap is about 12 trillion, which is still about 12 times Bitcoin's market cap, which is roughly 1 trillion. And you can still, for example, buy a car with Bitcoin. I mean, if you buy a car of like 50,000 and you send some Bitcoin for that, and you have to pay like $25 as a transaction fee, this is really not an issue. Percentage-wise, it's basically non-existent, the transaction fees. So that's fine. But like I said, it's pretty hard to buy a cup of coffee with Bitcoin if you want to keep it all completely on-chain. And right now, Bitcoin is not really used for that at all. Bitcoin is used for some bigger transactions. Some people get their salary in Bitcoin. Some people buy like large things with Bitcoin, either peer-to-peer or some shops accept it as well. But the smaller things, people don't really use Bitcoin for, but it's questionable if this is really needed for Bitcoin to succeed. Then we have a lot of other cryptocurrencies. We have, for example, Dash, Litecoin, Monero, Bitcoin Cash, Bitcoin SV, and we have many others. We have more than 100 and probably more than 1,000 cryptocurrencies. And what I mean by cryptocurrencies is not everything you will see on, for example, CoinMarketCap, because a lot of things, like for example, Ethereum, in my opinion, doesn't really count as a cryptocurrency, because Ethereum is a platform where a lot of stuff gets built on top of, and it's more of a world computer, as I explained in the previous video. And even though the ethers are being used as sort of a currency on the network, it is pretty much only meant as a currency on the network itself, and it's just meant for gas fees and stuff like that. So it's not really intended to be a currency where you go and get your ethers and go to the supermarket and pay for whatever you buy with these ethers. So there are some cryptocurrencies that are really focused to be a currency, and Dash and Litecoin and Monero and Bitcoin itself are examples of that. And even though Bitcoin currently is more used as a store of value, the idea was to be a real currency, and it's still possible. There just need to be a couple of things need to be fixed before that really can happen. Most of these are actually copies of the Bitcoin code. you can pretty much, if you are handy enough with a computer, you can pretty much copy the code of Bitcoin and then tweak some things, and you have your own working blockchain with a cryptocurrency. So these are kind of a lot more lazy than Bitcoin was. Bitcoin was kind of a great invention, sort of a revolution in the monetary system. And a lot of the other cryptocurrencies are more just a copy of what Bitcoin is doing, and they try to do it better, or at least in a different way. And some have their own advantages, some have their own disadvantages. I'm not going to go in every one of these cryptocurrencies, but they all have their own things going for them. Do we need one? Well, it is currently, like I said before, Bitcoin itself is kind of hard to use as a real currency for smaller payments. So we might need a different currency for day-to-day transactions, and then we can use Bitcoin more as a store of value and actually pay, buy your house or buy your car with Bitcoin, and then actually use, for example, Dash for buying your coffee. But maybe with stuff like Lightning Network, we can actually use Bitcoin for all of these things, and we don't really need another cryptocurrency. But it could be possible that both Bitcoin and another cryptocurrency can succeed side by side. Like, again, for example, Dash could be used for smaller transactions with Bitcoin as a store of value, and these things could coexist. However, currently there are over 100 and maybe over 1,000 cryptocurrencies, and I definitely don't see all of them succeed. I see only room for one or two, basically. And it's, like I said before, it's even questionable if we need one at all. We could pretty much use Bitcoin for all of these things eventually. And of course, it's not inflationary like fiat money. However, this really depends per cryptocurrency. You have to look in every single one of them to actually see how their inflation and stuff works, because most of them still have mining, and this leads to some inflation at least, and some have a lot of their coins actually given to the founders and stuff like that. So there's a lot of kind of shady stuff going on with a lot of these cryptocurrencies, and you will really have to look into every one of them separately to decide if you think it's gonna succeed in any substantial way. The concept of digital scarcity is pretty much the biggest concept for Bitcoin. The idea is that digital scarcity can only exist once, because Satoshi Nakamoto chose 21 million Bitcoins to be the cap of Bitcoin, and this makes Bitcoin very scarce because there's a cap of 21 million. However, if people just start copying the Bitcoin code and just issue a quote-unquote new Bitcoin, for example, we have Bitcoin Cash, we have Bitcoin SV, and we have Dash, and all these types of things that are kind of a copy of Bitcoin and therefore kind of a new Bitcoin, and this in a way inflates the supply. But we as a community kind of said, well, none of these are actual Bitcoin, so Bitcoin is still scarce and digital scarcity still exists. But if people actually start accepting something else as Bitcoin, and if people, especially new people, probably get into crypto and don't really understand the difference between Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash, for example, then you have a kind of a big problem, because if one of these cryptos actually ever overtakes Bitcoin, digital scarcity doesn't really exist anymore, because at that point you're kind of in a slippery slope where everyone can just issue a new cryptocurrency and it may become bigger than Bitcoin, and therefore digital scarcity is kind of gone forever. However, if this happens, then none of them will probably really reach any mass adoption, because then, you're going to keep like 1,000 different cryptocurrencies, and none of them will really gain any actual trust. But for Bitcoin, we kind of, like I said, as a community, we accepted Bitcoin as the one that is true, the one that was first there. And even though there are some technical disadvantages to Bitcoin, this is not really enough of a problem to choose something else and therefore let digital scarcity go to waste. Conclusion of this video: Bitcoin is currently more used as a store of value than a currency, and it is questionable if it is ever gonna be used as a real day-to-day currency. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of cryptocurrencies. Most of them will probably disappear, and also most of them are actually copies of the Bitcoin code, and most of them will disappear. What I mean by this is, their blockchain is gonna stay there forever, but I think a lot of them will go to pretty much zero and will not be used as a currency. And there might be a couple of exemptions, and there might be a couple that get used aside of Bitcoin. Hopefully and probably none of them will actually overtake Bitcoin, because if this happens, then digital scarcity doesn't really exist anymore. But we could see, for example, Bitcoin going to match gold's market cap, which is 12 trillion, and then we could have something like Dash or one of the other ones going to a market cap of, for example, 1 trillion, and just used as the cash, as the day-to-day transaction tool, and then Bitcoin for the bigger amounts. And this system could very well work. However, we don't need 1,000 different cryptocurrencies for this to work. Only one or two will succeed, and even that is questionable, because maybe Bitcoin is gonna succeed for all of these use cases, and then we don't need a different cryptocurrency at all. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you in episode 5, where we're gonna continue this beginner's guide to crypto.